Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be, to the Atlantean Archive. Today, I want to take you on a tour of the strange and unusual, into the world of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, into the Bermuda Triangle and the lost city of Atlantis, into hauntings and UFOs and alien abductions and all things paranormal. Yes, this is my 1970s Paranormal Library, which, once I got to digging into it, I discovered was more extensive than I remembered it being. Now, for those of you who know anything about these kind of subjects, you may remember that there was, in the mid-1960s, a huge explosion of renewed interest in all things occult, supernatural, paranormal, lost civilizations, mystical powers, Atlantis, all of that kind of stuff. All sorts of speculation in those days. In 1968, I think it was, one of the most popular, influential books ever published on the subject came out. That was Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods, which promoted the ancient astronaut theory and gave you ancient aliens today, whether you're thankful or not. Send Mr. von Däniken a postcard, let him know. He's still out there lecturing and stuff, even though he's probably pushing 90 years old by now. I'm not sure. Anyway, I did see him not too long ago on something. But when I was a kid, I was fascinated by all of this kind of stuff. In the 1970s, I wasn't reading a whole lot on anything like that yet. I was still a pretty little kid, but I was watching it. You better believe that. And I was into sci-fi and horror movies and everything else, that, the likes of which I've talked about on this channel so far. So anything strange, unusual, dealing with monsters, the paranormal, UFOs, anything like that, it had my interest. And as I got older, I started collecting books, a ton of which came out in the 1970s on these subjects. I mean, it began again in the latter part of the 1960s, but really came into its own in the 1970s when people started cranking these books out left and right. And I would go into thrift stores with my mom, my grandma. They loved to shop Goodwill and stuff like that. And I would find all kinds of books on these types of subjects. So I started this collection. And some of the shows that influenced me, some of you will remember, you Gen Xers and older people remember shows like In Search Of with Star Trek's Leonard Nimoy. He hosted the program at that time. And they explored all kinds of subjects like this. And not just the woo stuff either. They were also into any kind of mystery that you could think of. Amelia Earhart, D.B. Cooper, the loss of the Titanic, which is kind of fun to go back and watch that episode now and see what the speculation was at the time as compared to, what we know today. And you better believe when they finally released that show on DVD, my little nostalgic heart went right out and bought the box set. Yep, here it is, the box set. Leonard there on the front, this good stuff there on the back. Yeah, this was hugely influential with me. There's one of the DVD sets on there, showcasing the Titanic episode. But I was all about this kind of stuff when I was a kid, all into it. Whether or not, and I had opinions on it, how much of it I bought into and all that sort of thing, but already I was starting to play with writing my own stories. And even today, whether you are into this stuff, whether you think there's anything to it or not, if you're a writer like I am, it serves as serious grist for the mill. All of these stories you read in these kinds of books, they give you just tons and tons of inspiration. And so that's a good reason why I hold on to some of these, along with, the nostalgia factor, which I'm a sucker for anyway. So without further ado, my 1970s Paranormal Library. Now, let's get started here. One of the first books that I bought on this subject, I got through a school order catalog. This is Bigfoot and Nessie, Two Mysterious Monsters by Angelo Ressaniti and Dwayne Damon. Yeah, I ordered that through a school book service. I don't know that you could get something like this today through a school service like Scholastic or whatever. And that was my favorite thing, as I've mentioned before on this channel about going to school in those days. It was when they passed around the book order forms, and you could pick crap like this up. And the first part of it has all kinds of stories, having to do with Bigfoot, the sightings and all that sort of thing, and all sorts of anecdotes and full of illustrations. And then the second part of the book has to do with the Loch Ness Monster. And again, all sorts of stories, all sorts of illustrations. Really fired my interest even further than it already was from In Search Of and other programs like that, and got me all kinds of interested in it. In the same vein, A book that was often recommended by researchers who were writing on that subject was this one right here. This is In Search of Lake Monsters by Peter Costello. Those of you who have heard of the Loch Ness Monster, maybe that's the only sea serpent type creature you've ever heard of. But the fact of the matter is that there have been all sorts of legends about various Nessie-like creatures all over the world. I was unaware of it until I started getting into it more as a teenager, but even in Virginia, where I'm from, which is right next to the Chesapeake Bay, there was supposedly a sea serpent of some type that had been spotted in the Chesapeake Bay. They called it, appropriately enough, Chessie. Lake Champlain in New York, I think it's New York, where it borders Canada up there. Might be wrong. They have Champ. That's their monster. There's another one in Canada, in Lake Okanagan, called Ogopogo. And there are others throughout the entire world. They've got a couple here. Slimy Slim, that's a creature supposedly in Idaho, Sweden. Star Show Animal, Iceland, or is that Ireland? Ireland's Puka and Piest. Scotland also has more than just the Loch Ness Monster. There's a loch there, Loch Morag, where they have a creature called Morag Maggie. Back when most people were writing on these subjects, Loch Morag was much harder to reach. Most of the people in that area didn't speak English. They still spoke Scots Gaelic. So it was harder to get into and harder to function around there. Less research was done on it. But yeah, In Search of Lake Monsters by Peter Costello. This book was widely recommended at the time. Again, it's got those great old 1970s type illustrations. And those of you who will remember the famous surgeon's photograph of the Loch Ness Monster, which later on was proven to be a fake, you may not have known that he took more than just that picture, though. Here's another one at the very bottom where you can see what's left of the creature's head, supposedly, diving under the water. So as a kid, that was fascinating. That was before we knew the surgeon's photograph was a fake. Obviously, some people thought that it was, but that was before we knew. Then, speaking of Ogopogo, here's this book. This is by Mary Moon, who was, if I remember correctly, a journalist who got involved in exploring the Lake Okanagan mystery. And this one goes into Canada's. I was wondering if there's a picture here that you might want to see. But yeah, there's a plesiosaur, which some people think, the Loch Ness Monster is, and other people were thinking that perhaps the Okanagan creature is. This one, the In Search Of covered both Nessie and Ogopogo. And the successor program to In Search Of, many of you will remember fondly, Unsolved Mysteries, hosted by Robert Stack in the 80s, went into an investigation on Ogopogo, the Lake Okanagan Monster. So yeah, there's those for you here. Now, one of the, again, going back to In Search Of, many of you, although you're going to be familiar with In Search Of, you Gen Xers and older people certainly will be, and I know many of you love that program. I've talked to you about it. You may not know, however, that there was a series of tie-in books that were written by Alan Landsberg, who was the producer of In Search Of. And the first couple of books, he also wrote with his wife, Sally. This was the first one. This is In Search of Ancient Mysteries. Alan and Sally Landsberg. Yeah, I guess I should have given you close-ups maybe of some of the other stuff. Common crystal skull there. There's that artifact from, I forget what civilization it is in South America, that they actually built a replica of the thing as a glider, and it flies. So, make whatever you want of that, but a lot of people claim, it's a model of an ancient airplane, that sort of thing. So, on the back here, the evidence is overwhelming. Before human history was written, a race of beings traveled to the earth across the voids of space. This, the foreword here, written by Rod Serling. Now, this was also done as a TV documentary. Let's see, what is it? A Timex special on NBC TV, as indicated up here. And the program was actually narrated by Rod Serling. I thought I'd read something here, too, just because it's funny. If you've never read Rod Serling, many of you, of course, will know The Twilight Zone, but Rod Serling was not just a good television script writer. He was also a very competent prose writer. He adapted many of his Twilight Zone stories as short stories in book collections. They're really quite good. And if you've ever watched anything by Serling, he was very well spoken. Pretty much how he comes across on The Twilight Zone, exactly how he talked in casual interview conversations. And if you've never seen an interview with Rod Serling, you owe it to yourself to correct that. It is kind of funny because he writes this about his interview going into this project with Alan Landsberg. It was really funny the way he puts it. He talks about a little bit about television production and then his own reticence to buy into any of these ideas. There is a certain uniqueness to my long association with Alan Landsberg. Unlike the usual relationship between writer and producer, we have never threatened each other with bodily harm. And even our artistic disagreements, which are absolutely par for the television course, have been quiet. Things ended with a mutually satisfying compromise. The reason for this in no way reflects a benign character on my part. I happen to be a screamer, pacer, wall climber, and curtain chewer. Alan Landsberg, on the other hand, is a quiet guy who manages to make his point in a semi-whisper while the echoes of your own shouting still float over the scene. So he's talking about going into this with Alan, and Alan laying all evidence for his ancient astronaut ideas, similar to von Däniken and all of that. And Serling says this: my normally articulate friend was babbling incoherently. That was the conclusion I reached after 15 minutes or so of discussion. As far as I was concerned, we were talking about pure fiction, and spacemen visiting Earth was one of the most outworn themes in the field. Rod, I think it's real. I think I can prove that Earth was visited by intelligent life from outer space. With a sense of sorrow over a reasonably good mind gone sour, I said, okay, let's see it. So Landsberg showed him all of his evidence and everything, and Serling writes, by the time we were finished, I had seen enough evidence to convince me that we had entered a new and fascinating field of research. If we kept at it, we would turn up more and more pieces of the puzzle encapsulated in the question, where did we come from? I now think it is highly possible that man had his genesis somewhere in outer space. The unsatisfying part of television is that we only have 50 minutes to outline the theory. In the following pages, Alan has the time to draw you into his private twilight zone, and like me, I think you'll be hooked. So, In Search of Ancient Mysteries by Alan and Sally Landsberg, with a great introduction there by Rod Serling, who apparently was convinced, whether you are or not. Apparently Serling was. Then another one that was a follow-up here, In Search of Lost Civilizations. Many of you remember that card there from the title sequence of In Search of. This also by Alan Landsberg. I guess he wasn't writing with Sally at this time. I think they divorced. But the foreword here is by Leonard Nimoy, who would go on to, of course, host the series, one of his most memorable roles. And oddly enough, I heard Nimoy talking about it later on. He always got interviewed about Star Trek. He said that's all anybody ever wants to talk about. He said nobody wants to talk about In Search of, which I really, thought was intriguing and poured effort into. So it was interesting that it's a very short forward that Nimoy has here. And it was like a homecoming for me, his involvement with the series. Long before my involvement in Star Trek, I was a voyager in the special world that seems to exist just beyond our imaginations. The list of subjects was perfect. Not only would we venture into lost civilizations like Atlantis, but in time we would investigate extraterrestrials, strange phenomena, myths and monsters, magic and witchcraft, and missing persons whose disappearances are inexplicable. So Nimoy goes on to talk about how happy he is to be involved in that kind of project. So again, Lost Civilizations by Alan Landsberg, with the introduction by Leonard Nimoy himself. And then In Search of Extraterrestrials, also by Alan Landsberg, and again with an introduction by Leonard Nimoy there. The uncensored facts behind today's UFO mystery revealed. The shocking discovery on the moon's surface officials never made public. Flying saucer landings across America by alien explorers. The awesome message from another planet. All sorts of stuff here. I think there's a couple other In Search of books that I don't have. These were interesting. And something I did want to point out in here real quick. When I was reading the book, I was I just did a double take. I'm like, what? This is crazy. Some of you, well, those of you my age and older, will remember the Heaven's Gate cult. Remember the guys that got together and committed suicide thinking that there was a UFO following in the tail of the Hale-Bopp comet, and they were all going to ascend as spirits up into the UFO, and they were going to be taken off to heaven. The guy who was heading up that cult was named Marshall Applewhite. Well, what's interesting is that I had no idea until I started reading this. This book was published in '76. There were some news stories circulating at the time by CBS, hosted by none other than Walter Cronkite at the time, dealing with a cult movement in the Pacific Northwest, starting in Oregon, it looks like, where Marshall Applewhite first appears on the scene. at least in a big way. I think he was into weird stuff. He was very religious as a kid, and he started getting crazy as he got older. But he was running around Marshall Herf Applewhite, traveling with a woman. He claimed they claimed they were just friends. It was platonic. Who knows? Mrs. Bonnie Lou Truesdale Nettles. They were calling themselves Bo and Peep. UFO cultists recruiting followers to ascend to a UFO with them. And the 1970s was weird enough, folks, that there were people willing to follow two crackpots who called themselves Bo and Peep. And what's interesting, what Landsberg talks about here in reporting on the news stories on the subject, is they already expected to die. They committed suicide, of course, in the 80s in the Heaven's Gate situation, which they hadn't called their movement Heaven's Gate yet or anything, and Applewhite's theology changed over time. At first, they were talking about a physical resurrection from the dead, then they go up into the UFO. And Bo and Peep thought that they would be killed by the unbelievers for the message that they were preaching about the UFOs and about ascension and all that sort of thing, and that they would be raised from the dead, and they would take their followers up into the UFO. And they believed that they were actually the two witnesses of the biblical book of Revelation. The witnesses are killed by people who refuse their message, and then they are raised in sight and ascend to heaven. They were resurrected there. And it's just fascinating to see that they were already at this back then, and they were already accumulating followers. And of course, we all know the tragedy that ensued, and those famous pictures of Marshall Applewhite with the look on his face. It's interesting. One of the news stories on this, there is one common denominator amongst almost all of the converts. All are seekers who, like Mariah, one of the followers interviewed, have been looking for something for a long time. Many have tried Scientology, yoga, Zen, offbeat cults, hallucinogens, hypnosis, tarot cards, and astrology. Almost all believe in psychic phenomena. Quote unquote, some people, says the former opera singer who claims he will rise from the dead and take his followers to heaven on a UFO, will try anything. They're quoting Marshall Applewhite there. He was a singer once. Also, a vet. Yeah, he was in the military at one time. So, yeah, if you want to read about that, it's in this. In Search of Extraterrestrials by Alan Landsberg. So, yeah, crackpots were already hunting down followers back then and planning to get themselves killed in some way, shape, or form. Then we move on to books on the Bermuda Triangle. This was a huge thing. You can find all sorts of books on the subject, all sorts of TV shows, and movies were made about the triangle, the Devil's Triangle, as it's sometimes called, the Bermuda Triangle mostly. And so many books written on that subject, talking about all the ships and planes and the mysterious disappearances of people, weird phenomena, all that sort of stuff. Well, one of the premier books that was written on the subject during that time was this one. This is The Devil's Triangle by Richard Weiner. Weiner would come back later on with a sequel, The Devil's Triangle 2. Both of these books investigate many of the well-known stories and some not so well-known stories of the ships and the planes and the people who vanished in the triangle, and all the speculation, time warps, UFOs, abduction, Atlanteans coming up and snatching people from the bottom of the ocean, sea monsters, all that kind of stuff. This influenced even Close Encounters of the Third Kind, not this book specifically, but all the rumors and speculation about the triangle. Those of you who have seen that movie, you'll remember it starts off with the discovery of a bunch of planes sitting around in the desert. Those are Avenger torpedo bombers from Flight... I don't believe this. As many of the times as I've read that, Flight 105 or something like that, that was lost in the Bermuda Triangle. And so Spielberg, starts his movie off there with the idea that they were snatched by the aliens. And yeah, it's interesting stuff. Weiner goes into all of these stories, so many of them, classic triangle stories, and again, some that I had never heard before. Some of them genuinely creepy. Again, if you're looking for grist for the imagination, though, it's hard to do better than these 70s paranormal books. Weiner is also interesting in that, if I remember correctly, he was a journalist, and he took a more skeptical view. So this is not a guy trying to recruit you into believing there are UFOs hunting people down in the Bermuda Triangle or whatever. He offered many reasonable conclusions, many explanations for what he thought was really going on. And many of them very simple disappearances. You'll find a boat full of people, a ghost ship, as they sometimes call it, a boat missing. It looks like it was abandoned in haste or whatever. All the people are gone. And then, all the speculation starts of what happened to them, and paranormal solutions are suggested. Weiner's like, well, maybe there was just a reason they thought they had to abandon ship. He gives, and they floated off. They might have moored themselves to the ship with a lifeboat or something, and then they got separated, whatever happened, by a storm, anything, and they got lost at sea. And then a legend was born. So that's kind of his approach to it. But, it has the all of the kinds of obligatory photos that you get in the books from that time, which help inspire the imagination, certainly in a kid like me that was reading these things. The loss of the USS Cyclops, one of the biggest triangle mysteries. This is one ship that has never been found. They have never found the wreck of the USS Cyclops. I think it was actually the largest ship ever lost in the triangle. So those by Richard Weiner. Weiner wrote some other books, including this one, From the Devil's Triangle to the Devil's Jaw. This has to do, with various disappearances in strange waters all around the world. Newly documented mysteries, hundreds of amazing sagas that defy explanation by modern science. Do supernatural forces control the seven seas? I'm guessing that Weiner, from what I know of him and his writing, did not have much influence on the marketing of these books. He probably would not have written that. But again, more chronicling of mysterious disappearances and all that sort of thing throughout the world. So if you're looking to kind of go back in time, take a look at some of these old stories and have a more skeptical eye toward it or whatever, then Richard Weiner's books are probably what you're looking for on that subject. Then you have this one. This is one of the kind of the dime store books released on that subject. This is The Bermuda Triangle by Adlai Kent Stevens. The Bermuda Triangle is a sunny place with beautiful lime green water where ships and planes vanish without a trace. This is just your standard. Here's some more stuff about the triangle. Here's stories you've heard 100,000 times. It does have an interesting little fold-out map, though, outlining the triangle and all of that. Unfortunately, the old cover is missing. It was like a blue crystal skull sitting in ice or something like that. Actually, I think, they've got one there. That's the picture that was initially on the cover, which no longer attached to the book. Yeah, it was one of those weird covers where there's a hole cut out in it so that the page underneath of it is the one with the picture, and you just see the skull on there with the Bermuda Triangle thing. So, yeah, another one of my thrift store finds. Moving on. The Lunar Effect. This is Biological Tides and Human Emotions by Arnold Lieber, MD. This is one of the books, probably the best known of them, that went into the question of, does the moon affect human behavior, and if so, how? The television show In Search Of, they did a program on this where they interviewed Dr. Lieber, and to his consternation, I think, also interviewed a scientist who was skeptical of Lieber's claims and was out to debunk him on this. Feel like doing something strange, dangerous? Look at the moon. It's probably full. And all kinds of interesting testimony. There's this really went out of favor for a while. I'll give you a little closer look there. But it has been coming back in recent years, people speculating about the moon, its influence on human behavior, and he's got a lot of charts and that kind of stuff in here. It's pretty dry reading overall. The Lunar Effect, another one from that time. Now, along with the Landsbergs and people like Nimoy and Rod Serling and all, one of the biggest names in 70s paranormal fiction was Charles Berlitz. Charles Berlitz's World of Strange Phenomena. I want to make sure I said that right. Back here. Bizarre, baffling, unbelievable, but all true. A brutal Chicago slaying remains unsolved until the victim returns to point out her killer and the evidence to convict him. A woman is talking to a friend when spontaneously and without apparent cause her body bursts into flames. Yes, spontaneous human combustion was a big deal in the 70s. Those of you who remember the Kolchak series, The Crackle of Death, they did one on that one. There was a ghost causing it in that particular episode. But yeah, interesting stuff. People have joked that we Gen X kids grew up with all kinds of fears. One of them was quicksand. Everybody seemed to get caught in quicksand. We thought it was going to be a much bigger problem than it turned out to be. The other was spontaneous combustion. You just might suddenly blow up in your bed one day. The walls of a Georgia house begin to bleed. The police confirm that it is human blood, but there is no body. It is the house itself that is bleeding. These are but three of the hundreds of strange occurrences, modern-day miracles, and puzzling facts brought together in a single volume by Charles Berlitz, author of the best-selling The Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, Berlitz was one of the biggest authors in that area at the time, and there it is, his bestseller, The Bermuda Triangle. Got a picture of Mr. Berlitz on the back there, looking quite serious, with various listings. Time bestseller #1, Publishers Weekly bestseller #1, New York Post bestsellers, Chicago Tribune World Book bestsellers, New York Times Book Review bestseller list #1 again, the Washington Post bestsellers #1. So this was a huge book back then. This is, kind of up there with Chariots of the Gods. Not quite as close. Yeah, there's one of those books that does the cutout thing, like the other one I was telling you about. So the Charles Berlitz book on unexplained disappearances, apparently originally and then probably owned by Joe Jones. So Joe, if you're out there, there's your book, dude. All right, let's see. The Myth and Mystery of Atlantis by Warren Smith. New facts and ancient legends about the fall and rise of the spectacular lost continent. All sorts of stuff about Atlantis in the 1970s there. Answers and explanations of these and other startling questions. Was Atlantis the landing base for UFO nauts who came to Earth millions of years ago? Are the records of the Atlantean civilization hidden in the Great Pyramid of Giza? Is the Bermuda Triangle a magnetic warp over the site where Atlantis will rise to the surface? Are there secret tunnels connecting South America to Atlantis? And does Atlantis exist in the Hollow Earth? Yeah, Hollow Earth theory. That's another one that was being propounded quite a bit. Charles Berlitz also weighed in on this issue. This is The Mystery of Atlantis. Again, you can tell how well the Bermuda Triangle sold because they've got that just about as large print as this book here. For thousands of years, men have been intrigued by the lost continent of Atlantis mystery. Plato wrote about it. Charles Berlitz traces the history of one of the greatest literary and scientific controversies of all time. He evaluates various theories and legends about how the lost our eighth continent, and discusses new developments in underwater exploration and brought forth surprising new discoveries. So, yeah, Charles Berlitz, big into this stuff back then. And it's interesting, Berlitz did a whole lot of things. He's one of those guys that was sort of into everything. He was also a linguist. I've got a book that he wrote on Russian here, kind of an introduction to Russian or survival Russian, if you want to think of that, because I've been studying Russian on and off in my copious free time. Moving on. The Amityville Horror by J. Anson. I wasn't sure if it was Anselm or Anson. 28 Days of Terror in a House Possessed by Evil Spirits. Well, apparently not based on the research that came out afterwards, but it was still a pretty cool movie with, Margot Kidder and James Brolin. And I think it was an effective horror film, at least. Now, how many of you remember that scene with the rocking chair and supposedly the little pig that was a spirit that was visiting with a girl and the bright red eyes in there? Yeah, and that was freaky. And the flies in the room. The scariest story I have read in years, a fascinating and frightening book, Robert Kirsch, Los Angeles Times. I have never actually read this whole thing. The flies show up. Yeah, in the book too. The flies on the illustrations there from some of it. They've got flies all throughout this apparently the flies multiply as the book goes on. Yeah, that was early. Now here by chapter 24, they're all over the place. So that's pretty good. Yeah, the Amityville Horror, a book I guess I need to go back and read for entertainment purposes or again, more grist for the story mill. And then John G. Fuller, The Ghost of Flight 401. This was another popular book. In the dead of night, in December 1972, Eastern Airlines jumbo jet Flight 401 plunged into the Florida Everglades, killing 101 passengers and crew. Months later, the ghosts of its pilot and flight engineer began to appear on sister ships carrying parts salvaged from the crash. Ace investigative reporter John Fuller heard rumors of the ghosts and swore he would uncover the true story, no matter how bizarre. Apparently, Fuller went on to interview people who worked for the airline and get their stories. And many of them said, yeah, we got a ghost, man. So fascinating reading for believer or skeptic, according to Booklist. So now it goes to Flight 401. They made a movie of this with Ernest Borgnine, who plays one of the ghosts. Then on to UFOs. This is Robert Eminger, UFOs, Past, Present, and Future. The real facts behind thousands of mysterious sightings. Startling new information. Yeah, all kinds of pictures in here as well. Different lights in the sky and all that sort of stuff. And what does it mean? And various things that you can, even things photographed in space, all that sort of thing. There's a look at the back where he's got lists of various UFO sightings and that sort of thing. And it's interesting. These and thousands of other sightings by responsible civilian and military personnel, including Gemini and Apollo astronauts, continue right up to this day. And yeah, you had astronauts like Edgar Mitchell, who were very Apollo astronauts, very interested in this phenomena and believed that, we are not alone. Of course, a lot of interest in that now with various things coming out. But that was another big thing that I was into as a kid. Read all kinds of stuff on this. Speaking of UFOs, this is one I got from the library titled UFOs, Unidentified Flying Objects by Howard Liss. I got this from the George Mason Library in Northern Virginia. Bought this from the library there. Still got the old checkout card in the back, those of you who remember that world. The last time this was checked out was on May 25th, 1983. After that, they sold it to me. Fairfax County Public Library here. But just a very simple book geared mostly for younger readers, having to do with UFOs, aliens, all that sort of thing. They had a few pictures in this thing, but altogether not very remarkable, but I listed as one of the books that was influential with me as a kid. I remember wondering what people think, because this was, Sir John Herschel allegedly saw these lunar animals through his telescope in 1835. So I guess John Herschel thought he saw all that on the moon. All kinds of speculation until people realized that the moon was lifeless and Mars was lifeless. Speculation ran rampant on those subjects and people were seeing all sorts of stuff. Then we have this book, which was another hugely influential book promoted by a huge UFO researcher, J. Allen Hynek. This is The Andreas Affair by Raymond E. Fowler. This book concerns Betty Ann Andreas and Luca, who was supposedly abducted by aliens along with her children. The amazing documented account of one woman's terrifying encounter with alien beings. UFO kidnap case stuns scientists. They put her under hypnotic regression and got an interesting experience out of her where she claims these aliens took her on board their ship, that they took her to meet God, as a matter of fact. And what was interesting, there's Miss Luca there, or still Andreasen at the time, now Betty Ann Andreas and Luca, and her kids, her family, all that sort of thing. So there's some pictures of her in the hypnosis session that she underwent. They go into the transcripts on here. And one of the things that they were really fascinated with in this book is Betty Ann Andreasen was a devout Pentecostal, as I remember, devout Pentecostal Christian, sect of, or a subset rather, of evangelical Christianity, where they believe in the gifts of the Holy Spirit, miracles happening today, signs and wonders, all that kind of thing. So when she turned up, having had this kind of experience, the researchers were like, wow, we have never really had a chance to interview somebody who was, who has very, very strong religious beliefs, but has also been through this kind of experience. So, what are they going to make of this? Betty Ann came to the conclusion that the aliens were servants of God, and they took her to meet this being of light, she says, that she took to be God. So, yeah, another classic volume from the 1970s, and something that if you know anything about ufology, you'll find referenced over and over again. Then we have another interesting title here, John Baxter and Thomas Atkins, The Fire Came By, The Riddle of the Great Siberian Explosion. This is a book that investigates the Tunguska explosion that happened in Russia in 1908, where an asteroid or a comet, some kind of body like that, exploded in the atmosphere exploded in the atmosphere, but fairly close to the ground. It flattened an enormous area of Siberia. The impact tremors were detected by earthquake, seismographs, that sort of thing, up to 3,000 some miles away. They detected this in Washington State. Introduction here by Isaac Asimov, who is skeptical of the claims that the authors, their conclusions that they come to, the claims that they make, which is, in their opinion, based on testimony of people who saw the object as it was coming down, said that it changed directions, that it shouldn't have been able to do that unless it was a manned craft. And this is definitely one of the more, I think, rigorously researched and argued books that comes out of the paranormal 70s. So interesting. They've got some stuff in here, a little map shows you where the Tunguska explosion happened again. It's fascinating that the impact of that body, whatever it was so powerful that it was felt, on the other side of the world. But yeah, Asimov is weighs in here on this, and he says he finds their arguments, while speculative, compelling. He says he loved it and urged everybody to read it and give the arguments a chance. So yeah, they think a manned, I say manned, not manned by humans, but a manned craft of some type that basically overloaded, blew up, and was trying to get to an area of the earth that was not populated, and that's part that factors into it. So many things. I could go into a deeper book about explosions, a deeper explanation. There we go. Now I can talk. A deeper explanation on it. But yeah, interesting book, and why they come to the conclusions that they do. So yeah, if you're going to hunt down a 70s paranormal type book, this might be one of the ones that you want to go hunting for. Then the last one that I'll bring up in the 70s collection, at least I think, yeah, covered everything. This is Always Caren by Gene Walker. This is one of those books that has to do with life after death, the sort of thing that Richard Matheson would probably have been reading when he was writing What Dreams May Come, which I did an interview of. Geez, no, Matheson's dead. I did a review of, there's the word. Yeah, having trouble here today. I did a review of that book. This is the kind of thing that Matheson would have used as a source when he was getting into his study of that. This has to do with Caren Walker, here pictured on the back, a young woman who died of cancer after a long struggle with it, and the alleged paranormal experiences her mother had with her, and supposedly channeling answers from the other side. So this was a book that was featured, I remember distinctly, on Unsolved Mysteries, again with Robert Stack in the 1980s. So Always Caren. Now there are some honorable mentions here, just real quick to finish. Charles Berlitz again showed up in the 80s with this one. This is Atlantis, the Eighth Continent, where he goes into more up-to-date research as of that time. Yeah, Berlitz making an appearance there. This is a book that was written in the 60s, but is another huge one in the paranormal research area. This is The Interrupted Journey. John G. Fuller, author of Incident at Exeter. This is the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction case. For those of you, again, who are into this kind of stuff and you know anything about that. Couple who was supposedly taken aboard a UFO and experimented with. They, again, this was another TV movie. At least I think it was TV. I know it aired on TV. I don't know if it was theatrical and then got released on television or what it was. But yeah, The Interrupted Journey, another hugely influential book like the Andreas Affair, Chariots of the Gods, the Bermuda Triangle, and all that sort of thing from that time. There it is, my 1970s paranormal library. So whether you believe any of this stuff or not, whether you think there's anything to any of this, whatever your explanations for these subjects are, they are at least interesting, and they fascinated me as a kid and a teenager particularly, and they continue to serve as inspiration for me today as a writer when I think about bizarre stuff to feed the public, at least those who have read my crap. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Please share the content as you see fit. And until next time, God bless.